Look, every single year, billions, and I mean literally billions of dollars, are wasted globally on projects that just fail, stall out, or end up delivering a product that nobody actually wants. And a huge chunk of that waste, it stems from this massive tension in modern business. We're talking about the clash between the rigid, traditional rules of project management and the dynamic, fast-paced flexibility of agile teams. So let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating systematic literature review by Teemu Lappi and his colleagues that explores exactly how we can bridge that gap. If you've ever worked in an agile environment or, tried to manage one, you already know exactly the friction I'm talking about. What we are really looking at here is the evolution of control itself.
So how exactly do you control a project that is, by its very nature, designed to constantly change? Really think about it. Businesses today desperately want the speed, the innovation, and that laser-focused customer value you get from agile methodologies. But at the same time, the management layers above those teams, they still crave predictability. They want financial control and very clear milestones. It's a classic push and pull. On one side, you've got teams sprinting to adapt. On the other, executives wanting to know exactly what is going to be delivered 6 months from now. How do you govern a moving target without completely stifling the agility you wanted in the first place?
To make this complex topic super easy to digest, we're going to map out this clash systematically. We'll cover 1. The Agile governance clash. 2. Traditional versus agile models. 3. Redefining project goals. 4. Rethinking team incentives. 5. Agile monitoring and coordination. And finally 6. Governing the agile future. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Agile Governance Clash. Flexibility versus control.
Let's start by defining what we actually mean by project governance. Basically, it's the overarching system through which an organization controls, directs, and steers a project right toward its strategic objectives. Traditionally, this meant highly formalized planning at the very front end of a project. You figure out every single tiny detail of what you want to do, write it all down, and then strictly govern the execution of that exact plan. And hey, this approach works absolutely great when you are driving a train on fixed tracks. You know the exact destination, you know the exact route, no surprises. But actually, scratch that. It doesn't work at all when you are sailing an agile ship. Imagine a competitor drops a game-changing new feature or a global event completely shifts buyer habits overnight. If you're stuck on a fixed train track, you're going to derail. A ship, however, has to constantly adjust its sails to the shifting winds of customer needs if it wants to survive.
Moving to Section 2. Traditional versus agile models, a paradigm shift.
This isn't just a minor tweak in software or how we run daily meetings. It's a total paradigm shift in how we fundamentally view the nature of work. You've probably heard the Agile Manifesto line explicitly prioritizing responding to change over following a plan. Well, it challenged the core of traditional governance by putting continuous design improvement and real customer value way ahead of rigid, comprehensive documentation. I mean, imagine spending 6 solid months writing a flawless, heavily vetted 200-page spec document, only to realize the customer doesn't even want that exact product by the time you actually start building it. Agile prevents that massive waste of time and money. When your highest priority is satisfying the customer through early and continuous delivery, a strict governance structure that punishes deviation from an initial plan, that actually becomes a huge roadblock rather than a safeguard.
Drawing directly from the source's data, we can see a major structural transition here. We are moving away from a mechanistic, bureaucratic structure that tries to control the process from the top down. Think of that traditional structure like a rigid machine where every gear only does one highly specific, unchangeable task. We move from that to an organic, participative structure. This operates much more like a living ecosystem that seamlessly adapts to its environment, focusing on empowering the people rather than policing the process. Management style shifts heavily from strict command and control to true leadership and collaboration. You basically stop treating systems as fully predictable from day one and start treating them as evolving entities that absolutely require rapid, continuous feedback loops to succeed.
Section 3. Redefining project goals, evolving objectives.
So, if we can't predict the exact final product on day one, how do we govern what the team is actually aiming for? Well, instead of heavy, legally binding contracts locking in inflexible objectives early on, agile goal setting relies on a much more fluid approach. The research shows that agile teams continuously update their product vision based on real-world feedback. They govern the project scope by establishing a minimum viable product, or MVP, which just identifies the absolute bare minimum must-have features needed to deliver value quickly. They also rely heavily on a strict definition of done, or DoD, to maintain a high bar for quality without needing a massive spec sheet up front. And crucially, to make all this work, governance has to shift toward flexible build-hour contracts rather than fixed-price agreements. Because let's be real for a second, fixed-price contracts inevitably lead to tense boardroom arguments over whether changing a button from blue to green legally constitutes a change request.
All right, Section 4, Rethinking Team Incentives, the human element. If you change the goals, you inherently have to change how you motivate the people achieving them. While traditional projects heavily rely on external financial carrots and sticks, monetary bonuses for hitting early milestones or steep penalties for defaulting on a schedule, the data reveals a massive psychological shift in Agile. In Agile governance, intrinsic motivation really takes the wheel. The research highlights that team empowerment, decision-making authority, direct access to the customer, and peer recognition become the primary incentives. And there is a powerful psychological reason for this. When highly skilled professionals are trusted with total decision-making authority over how they accomplish their work, they take intense personal ownership of the outcome. The philosophy of Agile management itself becomes the best incentive to secure their absolute commitment, rendering traditional micromanagement totally obsolete. Section 5. Agile Monitoring and Coordination, Visualizing Progress. How do we actually track progress in this autonomous environment without a traditional manager constantly demanding status updates? Well, the reliance on comprehensive, text-heavy written documents simply vanishes. Those tedious traditional reports are entirely replaced by real-time visual tracking tools like Kanban boards and burn-down charts. A burn-down chart is simply a visual graph that shows exactly how much work is left to do versus the time remaining. It instantly highlights if the team is falling behind without anyone having to even ask. Furthermore, testing isn't just a phase at the very end of the line, it's a constant automated process used to validate user stories as they are completed. You don't read a 100-page weekly report to see if the project is healthy, you simply look at the board and you look at the working software. But don't misunderstand this, Agile teams certainly don't abandon metrics. No way. Instead, they monitor progress through specific frequent measures that actually matter. They use sprint reviews to validate deliverables directly with the customer. They look at quantitative metrics like earned added value, which tracks the actual tangible value delivered to the customer so far, alongside the schedule performance index, which is just a simple ratio telling you immediately if you are ahead of or behind your timeline. And for day-to-day coordination, they rely on constant informal communication using real-time IT tools like Slack and Skype. This removes communication barriers instantly, rather than making everyone wait for a formal weekly steering committee meeting just to make a crucial decision.
Finally, Section 6, Governing the Agile Future, a new type of governance.
Adopting an agile approach absolutely doesn't mean abandoning the rules. It just means changing them to fit the reality of the work being done. The core takeaway from the data is this: agile does not mean no governance. It is absolutely not the Wild West out there where everyone just does whatever they want. Rather, for an agile transition to actually succeed, organizational governance itself must transform to become just as adaptive and people-centric as the dynamic teams it oversees. You can't just mandate agile practices at the developer level but keep traditional, rigid, stage-gate governance at the executive level. The friction between those two worlds will literally tear a project apart. Governance must evolve from a mechanism of strict control into a mechanism of pure enablement and support.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to challenge your own organizational practices as you navigate this inevitable tension between control and flexibility. Look really closely at your own projects. Are you truly enabling agile teams with adaptive, people-centric governance, or are you still trying to drive a ship on fixed train tracks? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. I really hope this structured dive into the research gives you a powerful new lens through which to view and govern your next project.